Sign this. George Dodson thrust divorce papers toward his wife at her mother's graveside. The dirt was still fresh on the casket. The priest's prayer hadn't ended. Bertha was 8 months pregnant, his child heavy in her belly. Take it. Now. His voice cut through the cemetery like a blade. His mistress stood beside him, one hand resting on her own swollen stomach, the other draped possessively across George's arm. Behind them, the Dodson enforcers watched with stone faces. George's parents stood like judges awaiting a verdict, their expressions carved from satisfaction. Bertha's fingers trembled as she took the papers. Right there, in front of her mother's grave, in front of everyone who mattered in the Mafia world. She lost everything in that moment. But George Dodson made one catastrophic mistake. He had no idea who Evelyn Hill really was. He had no idea what she'd left behind. $700, million in offshore empires, private military contracts, and a revenge playbook designed exactly for this betrayal. And he had absolutely no idea what was coming for him. Before we continue, if you love stories about justice, resilience, and women who refuse to stay down, hit that subscribe button. This is just the beginning of Bertha's rise, and you're about to witness something extraordinary. Now, let's dive into the story. The cemetery stretched quiet and cold under a gray England sky. Bertha Hill knelt beside her mother's grave, white lilies clutched in one hand, the other cradling her swollen belly as though protecting the last piece of herself that hadn't shattered. Evelyn Hill was gone. The woman who'd raised her alone, who'd taught her to stand tall in rooms full of dangerous men, who'd loved her fiercely and without conditions, now rested 6 feet below frozen earth. And Bertha had never felt more abandoned. George stood behind her, but he might as well have been a stranger. She could feel the coldness radiating from him, could sense the shift that had been happening for weeks. She'd told herself it was stress, the family business, the pregnancy. She'd been lying to herself. The priest's voice droned about mercy and eternal rest, but Bertha wasn't listening. She was watching George's reflection in the polished black surface of the casket, watching his hand move to his coat, watching him pull out something folded, official, deliberate. He stepped forward. Bertha. She turned, grief still wet on her face, hope still clinging stupidly to her heart. He held out the papers. Sign this. What? Her voice barely escaped. Divorce papers. I've already signed. The words detonated in her chest. She staggered back, her hand flying to her mouth, the lilies falling into the dirt. George, what are you? My mother just... She couldn't finish, couldn't breathe. It's over. This marriage. Us. It's better this way. Better? Her mother was being lowered into the ground. She was carrying his child. His heir. And he thought, now surrounded by black-suited family enforcers and gray tombstones, was the moment to destroy her? You can't be serious. George, please. But his face was granite. Behind him, movement caught her eye. A woman stepped forward. Younger. Elegant. Visibly pregnant. She placed her hand on George's shoulder with the practiced ease of ownership, her belly round and prominent, pressed against his side. The woman's lips curved into something that wasn't quite sympathy. It was triumph. Bertha's knees buckled. She collapsed beside her mother's grave, divorce papers scattering across fresh dirt, her world fracturing into pieces too small to ever reassemble. Mourners whispered. Cameras from rival families discreetly captured the moment. This wasn't private grief, this was public execution. Then she saw them. George's parents, Vincent and Claudia Dodson, standing 30 feet back beneath a black umbrella, though rain hadn't fallen all day. They weren't mourning, weren't even pretending to care. Vincent's arms were crossed. Claudia's mouth held the ghost of a smile. They were watching, waiting. This wasn't impulse. This was planned. The apartment felt smaller than Bertha remembered. 4 days since the burial. 4 days since George's enforcers had escorted her from the Dodson estate with nothing but 2 suitcases and the clothes she'd been wearing. 4 days since she'd become a ghost in the only world she'd ever known. The flat was modest, a place Evelyn had kept. Just in case, she'd always said. Bertha used to think it was paranoia. Now, collapsed on the worn sofa with her swollen ankles propped on a pillow, she understood it had been preparation. Her phone buzzed. Another message. Unknown number. Heard about the divorce. Such a shame. George deserves better than a barren woman who couldn't even point. Bertha deleted it without finishing. It was the 7th message today. Yesterday there'd been 12. The day before, 20. Some were from Dodson associates, their sympathy dripping with poison. Others were from rival families, testing her vulnerability like sharks circling blood and water. A few were outright threats, veiled warnings that without George's protection, she was fair game. She'd stopped answering calls entirely. The landline rang. Bertha stared at it, her hand instinctively moving to her belly where the baby kicked, restless and strong. She let it ring. Voicemail clicked on. "Bertha, darling," Claudia Dodson's voice slithered through the speaker. "I know this transition must be difficult for you. We've arranged for a small settlement, enough to get you started somewhere else. Somewhere far from London, perhaps. Call me back so we can discuss the terms." "Oh, and dear?" "The Dodson name stays with the family. Best you remember that." The message ended with a click that sounded like a cell door closing. Settlement. They wanted her gone. Disappeared. Erased from their empire like she'd never existed. Bertha's hand curled into a fist. She'd given the Dodsons 3 years of loyalty. She'd attended their blood-soaked galas, smiled through their cruelty, played the perfect Mafia wife while George climbed their ranks. And now they were offering her table scraps to vanish quietly. The baby kicked again, harder this time. "I know," Bertha whispered, her voice cracking. "I know." She hadn't cried since the cemetery. Couldn't afford to. If she started, she feared she'd never stop. The apartment grew darker as evening settled over Sheffield. Bertha moved through the motions. Tea she didn't drink, toast she couldn't swallow, a bath that did nothing to wash away the humiliation still clinging to her skin. She found herself in the bedroom, standing before her mother's old jewelry box. Evelyn had kept it here, along with a few other belongings. Bertha had been avoiding it, afraid that opening it would make the loss too real. But tonight, the grief felt like company. She lifted the lid. Inside, pearls Evelyn never wore. A silver bracelet from Bertha's childhood. A photograph of the two of them at Brighton Beach, both laughing, both whole. Bertha's fingers trembled as she touched the photo. That's when she saw it. Tucked beneath the velvet lining, a small envelope. Cream-colored. Sealed. Her mother's handwriting across the front, in bold, deliberate letters. "In case he betrays you." Bertha's breath caught. She tore it open. Inside, a small brass key fell into her palm, heavy and cold. With it, a single folded letter. "My darling Bertha, if you're reading this, then the Dodsons have shown their true nature. I prayed this day would never come, but I didn't build an empire by trusting prayers alone. They are greedy, ruthless, and far more dangerous than you realize. I've watched them circle you like vultures since the day you married George. I've prepared for this. Take the key. Go to Hartwell and Associates' private vault, 14 Ashford Lane, Manchester. Ask for Thomas Hartwell. Give him this key and tell him Evelyn's daughter came home. He'll know what to do. Trust no one from the Dodson family. Not George, not his parents, not their lawyers or their generous settlements. They want you silent, broken, and gone. But you are my daughter, and I didn't raise you to disappear. What I've left you will change everything. Use it wisely. Use it ruthlessly. All my love, Mum." Bertha read the letter 3 times. Her hand shook. Her mind raced. Hartwell and Associates. She'd never heard the name. Evelyn had never mentioned a vault. Never mentioned preparing for George's betrayal. But she'd known. Somehow, she'd known. The baby shifted, and Bertha placed her hand over the movement, steadying herself. Outside, Sheffield's streetlights flickered to life. Her phone buzzed again, another unknown number. Another threat disguised as concern. Bertha looked at the key in her palm, looked at her mother's careful handwriting, looked at the life the Dodsons were trying to bury her in. Then she stood, pulled on her coat, and slipped the key into her pocket. She had a vault to find, and answers to uncover. The building on Ashford Lane looked unremarkable, sandwiched between a solicitor's office and a boutique accounting firm, its brass plate so discreet Bertha almost walked past it twice. Hartwell and Associates. Private wealth management. No windows on the ground floor. Security camera above the door. A keypad entry system that looked military grade. Bertha's hand found the key in her pocket. She'd barely slept since finding her mother's letter. The train ride to Manchester had been a blur of paranoia, checking over her shoulder, convinced every businessman with a newspaper was a Dodson informant. She pressed the buzzer. A camera swiveled toward her. Moments later, the lock disengaged with a heavy click. The lobby was small, tasteful, silent. Marble floors, minimalist furniture. A reception desk manned by a woman whose expression gave away nothing. "I'm here to see Thomas Hartwell," Bertha said, her voice steadier than she felt. "Your name?" "Bertha Hill. Evelyn Hill's daughter." The receptionist's professional mask slipped for just a second recognition. Maybe respect before she nodded and lifted a phone. "Mr. Hartwell, she's here." Thomas Hartwell was in his 60s, silver-haired and sharp-eyed. wearing a suit that cost more than Bertha's entire wardrobe. He greeted her in a private conference room that smelled of leather and old money. "Miss Hill." He extended his hand. "I've been expecting you, though I'd hoped under different circumstances." Bertha shook his hand, confusion flickering across her face. "You knew I'd come? Your mother was very thorough." He gestured to a chair. "Please, sit. I imagine this has been a difficult week." Difficult. The word felt laughably insufficient. Hartwell opened a sleek briefcase and withdrew a folder. "Evelyn Hill, maiden name Evelyn Frost, retained our services 14 years ago. She was very specific about her instructions. In the event of her death, and in the event of certain triggering circumstances involving the Dodson family, everything was to be released to you." Triggering circumstances? Bertha's hand moved to her belly. "Abandonment, divorce, threats to your safety." Hartwell's expression darkened. "Your mother was a remarkable woman, Miss Hill. She saw dangers most people miss." He slid the folder across the table. Bertha opened it. The first page was a summary. Simple. Devastating. Estate of Evelyn Frost Hill. Total asset valuation, £547 million. Approx $700 million USD. The room tilted. "I'm sorry. There must be..." Bertha's voice caught. "This can't be right." "It's accurate." Hartwell turned the page for her. "Your mother built an empire very few people knew existed. Offshore technology investments through shell companies in Singapore and the Cayman Islands. Private equity funds in renewable energy and pharmaceutical development. International real estate holdings in Dubai, Monaco, New York, Hong Kong, and London. And..." He paused. "Private military contracting firms that provide security services to governments and corporations worldwide." Bertha stared at the listings. Companies with names she'd never heard. Holdings in countries she'd barely visited. Numbers so large they stopped making sense. How did she... "Your mother started small. Very small. An inheritance from her own mother. Invested wisely in the early tech boom. She was brilliant with patterns, with predictions. She saw opportunities decades before others did." Hartwell's respect was evident, and she was exceptionally careful. "Every asset is registered under different entities, different names, different jurisdictions. The Dodsons never knew. Neither did most of the world." He pulled out another envelope, cream-colored. Evelyn's handwriting. "She left this for you as well." Bertha's hands shook as she unfolded the letter. "Bertha, by now you know the truth. I'm sorry I kept it from you, but secrecy kept us both safe. The Dodsons would have killed me for this fortune. They'll come for you once they learn you have it. But here's what they don't know. I've been watching them. For 3 years, since you married George, I've had people, investigators, analysts, former intelligence operatives documenting everything. Every betrayal, every illegal deal, every threat. The evidence is in the vault. Safety deposit box 447. George's affair. The mistress's lies. The money his parents paid her. Audio recordings of them plotting to remove you permanently if the divorce didn't work. You have power now, my love. More than money, you have truth. Use both. Make them regret underestimating Evelyn Hill's daughter." "Mum," Bertha set the letter down carefully, her breathing shallow. $700 million. Evidence that could destroy the Dodson family. A network of resources her mother had spent decades building. Thomas Hartwell watched her with quiet understanding. "What would you like to do, Miss Hill?" Bertha looked at the documents spread before her, at the companies, the accounts, the power her mother had hidden in plain sight. She thought of George's cold voice at the cemetery, his mistress's smirk, Claudia Dodson's condescending voicemail. Get you started somewhere else. Something shifted inside her. The grief didn't disappear, but it changed shape, hardened, sharpened, into something that felt dangerously like purpose. "I want to see the evidence," Bertha said quietly. "All of it." Hartwell smiled. "Right this way." The vault's lower level felt like stepping into a spy film. Hartwell led Bertha through a corridor lined with numbered deposit boxes, each one requiring biometric authentication and dual-key access. The air was climate-controlled, sterile, silent except for the soft hum of security systems. They stopped at box 447. "Your mother's contact is waiting inside the viewing room," Hartwell said, scanning his fingerprint. "His name is Marcus Webb, former MI6, now private intelligence. Evelyn trusted him with her life." He paused. "And with yours." The heavy door swung open. Marcus Webb was not what Bertha expected. Mid-50s, lean and weathered. with the kind of stillness that suggested he'd spent years learning to disappear in crowds. He wore a simple black sweater and tactical watch, and when he stood to greet her, his handshake was firm but not aggressive. "Miss Hill." His voice carried a faint Welsh accent. "I'm sorry for your loss. Evelyn was an extraordinary woman." "You knew my mother well?" "For 12 years. She hired me initially to investigate a business competitor. When she discovered who you were marrying, she expanded my contract considerably." He gestured to the table between them, where a tablet and several folders sat waiting. "Please, sit. What I'm about to show you won't be easy." Bertha lowered herself into the chair, her hand instinctively protective over her belly. "Mr. Hartwell said there's evidence. About George. About the Dodsons." "There is." Webb opened the first folder. "Your mother suspected George's intentions roughly 18 months ago. Small things at first, unexplained absences, encrypted phone calls, financial discrepancies. She asked me to watch him." He slid a photograph across the table. George entering a hotel in Mayfair. Timestamp, 14 months ago. Another photo. George with a blonde woman, her face turned toward him, laughing. Same hotel, same day. "Charlotte Vance," Webb said flatly. "Art consultant. No Mafia connections," which made her perfect an outsider the Dodsons could control. Bertha stared at the woman's face. This was the mistress who'd stood at the cemetery, hand on her belly, triumph in her eyes. Webb tapped the tablet. Audio, recorded 6 months ago. George's voice filled the room, tinny through the speaker but unmistakable. "Need to time it right. Can't just divorce her out of nowhere. Need a reason the families will accept." A woman's voice, Charlotte's. "What about the pregnancy?" "Mine. I mean, won't that be enough?" "Not by itself. They'll call you a homewrecker, me an idiot, but if we do it at a vulnerable moment, when she's already broken." Bertha's breath caught. "Like at her mother's funeral?" Charlotte suggested, her tone almost excited. "Exactly." Webb stopped the recording. "There are 17 more conversations like this. Planning. Strategizing. Your mother's people got everything." "She knew," Bertha whispered. "She knew he was going to do it at the burial. She suspected. She couldn't warn you without revealing how she knew, and she feared George would accelerate his timeline if he sensed exposure." Webb's expression softened slightly. "She was trying to protect you." He pulled up another file. Bank statements. "These transfers are from accounts controlled by Vincent and Claudia Dodson. Payments to Charlotte Vance. First payment, £50,000 occurred 9 months ago. Second payment, £75,000 3 months ago. Final payment, £100,000 deposited 2 days before your mother's funeral." Bertha's hands gripped the table edge. "They paid her. To destroy my marriage. They orchestrated the entire affair." Webb confirmed. "Charlotte was compensated for her participation. The Dodsons wanted you out of the family before Evelyn's estate was settled. They assumed you'd inherit something they had no idea how much." He opened another folder. Medical records. Ultrasound images. Charlotte's pregnancy. Webb laid out 3 ultrasound photos side by side. "Notice anything?" Bertha studied them. The dates were progressive, 12 weeks, 16 weeks, 20 weeks. But something was wrong. The images were too similar. Same angle. Same positioning. Same. "They're the same photo," Bertha breathed. "Digitally altered. The dates are changed, but it's the same scan." "Correct. We traced the original image to a stock medical photography database. Charlotte Vance has never been pregnant. She's wearing a prosthetic belly and showing doctored scans." Webb's voice hardened. "George doesn't know. The Dodsons might, but George believes it's real." The betrayal layered itself like sediment. Each revelation buried the last. Webb pulled up one final audio file. This was recorded 3 weeks ago, after the divorce papers were drafted, but before the funeral. George speaking with his father. He pressed play. Vincent Dodson's voice. "And if she fights the divorce? She won't. Not when she's grieving. Pregnant. Isolated. She'll be too broken. But if she does? If Evelyn left her something, and she decides to get difficult?" A pause. Then George, cold and measured. "Then we erase the problem. Accidents happen, Vincent. Pregnant women are fragile. A fall. A car malfunction. The families would understand." Vincent. Good. Clean. Final. The recording ended. Bertha sat frozen, her hands pressed against her belly where her child, George's child, kicked and turned, oblivious to the father who'd just casually discussed murdering them both. The heartbreak she'd carried since the cemetery didn't disappear, but it transformed, crystallized, became something diamond hard and unbreakable. He was going to kill me, she said quietly. If necessary, yes. Webb closed the tablet. Your mother gathered all of this so you'd have leverage, so you'd have protection, so you'd have proof when the world questions what happens next. Bertha looked up. What happens next? Webb's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. Anticipation, maybe approval. That, Miss Hill, is entirely up to you. This is the moment everything changes. Bertha is about to step into a power George never saw coming. If you're rooting for her, if you believe people who underestimate women deserve what's coming, leave a comment below. Tell me, what would you do with $700 million and evidence of betrayal? Let's talk about it. Now, let's watch Bertha rise. The transformation didn't happen overnight. It happened in calculated, deliberate steps, each one designed by the team Evelyn had left behind. 3 weeks after the vault, Bertha Hill attended her first event. The Thames Valley Charity Gala, black tie, 500 of London's elite crammed into a gilded ballroom at the Savoy. Politicians, tech billionaires, old money aristocrats, and carefully sprinkled throughout representatives from every major crime family in Europe. Bertha arrived alone. The gown was midnight black, Alexander McQueen, custom tailored to accommodate her now 9-month pregnancy. It draped elegantly over her belly, transforming what George had weaponized as weakness into a statement of strength. Diamonds at her throat, Evelyn's diamonds, worth more than the Dodson family's entire liquidity. She walked through the entrance like she owned the building. Because, according to the paperwork Marcus Webb had shown her that morning, she technically did. Evelyn's real estate portfolio included a 20% stake in the hotel. Heads turned. Whispers ignited. Is that Bertha Hill, George Dodson's ex-wife? I heard he divorced her at her mother's funeral. Heard she's been hiding in Sheffield. That doesn't look like hiding. A waiter appeared with champagne. Bertha accepted sparkling water instead, her hands steady, her expression serene. Marcus had coached her. Show them nothing. No grief, no weakness, no explanation. Let them wonder. Within minutes, the approaches began. First, a tech entrepreneur who'd partnered with one of Evelyn's offshore investment firms. Then a diplomat's wife curious about the Hill Foundation that had just donated £2 million to refugee medical programs. Then a silver-haired man who introduced himself as a venture capitalist but whose security details suggested something far more dangerous. Miss Hill. He kissed her hand, European style. Lorenzo Vitali, Naples. Your mother once helped me with a delicate financial matter. I was sorry to hear of her passing. Bertha recognized the name. Vitali ran one of Italy's most powerful crime syndicates and had absolutely no love for the Dodsons. Thank you, Mr. Vitali. My mother spoke highly of you. His eyes gleamed. Did she? How kind. I wonder, might you be interested in continuing certain arrangements she and I discussed? Shipping routes, import considerations. Mutually beneficial, of course. This was a test, an offer, an alliance. Bertha smiled. I'd be delighted to discuss it. Have your people contact Thomas Hartwell. He handles my interests now. Vital's smile widened. Excellent. As he walked away, Bertha felt the shift in the room's energy. She wasn't George Dodson's discarded wife anymore. She was Evelyn Hill's heir. The second event was a private equity summit in Monaco. Bertha flew first class, stayed at the Hotel de Paris, and attended boardroom meetings where men 3 times her age suddenly wanted her opinion on emerging markets and blockchain security. Photographs appeared in financial publications. Bertha Hill, CEO of Hill Global Investments, speaking at the Monaco summit. The third event was a Fashion Week after-party in Milan. The dress was Scarlet Valentino, impossible to ignore. Bertha moved through the crowd like a flame through darkness, collecting introductions, accepting business cards, deflecting personal questions with practiced grace. A journalist from Tatler approached. Miss Hill, there are rumors you've inherited a substantial fortune. Care to comment? My mother was a brilliant investor, Bertha replied smoothly. I'm honored to continue her legacy. And the divorce from George Dodson? Bertha's smile never wavered. Ancient history. The article ran 3 days later with photos of Bertha laughing with a French finance minister, looking radiant, powerful, untouchable. The headline, The Rise of Bertha Hill, from Mafia wife to global power player. By the 4th week, the underworld was buzzing. In Manchester, a Dodson lieutenant mentioned Bertha's name at a card game. His opponent, a man with connections to the Bratva, laughed. Dodson's ex? I heard she just bought a security firm, the kind with former Mossad on payroll. In Dublin, a weapons dealer told his partner, "The Hill woman's got reach now, real reach. Heard she's moving into Eastern European markets the Dodsons couldn't touch." In London, at a private club where family bosses gathered, Bertha's name came up over cigars and scotch. "George made a mistake," someone muttered. "George made a catastrophic mistake." Another corrected. George heard the whispers. He sat in the Dodson estate's study, scrolling through photographs on his tablet. Bertha at the gala, Bertha in Monaco, Bertha in Milan. Each image showed her more confident, more radiant, more powerful than the broken woman he'd left weeping at the cemetery. "How?" he demanded, slamming the tablet down. His father stood by the window, face grim. "We're looking into it," Vincent said. "Evelyn must have left her something. We're trying to determine the amount." "I don't care about the amount," George snarled. "She's meeting with Vitali, the Bratva, the Irish. She's building alliances. She's pregnant and alone," Claudia dismissed from her chair. "Playing dress-up with money she'll burn through in 6 months." But George wasn't convinced. He'd seen the photographs, seen the way powerful men leaned in when Bertha spoke, seen the security detail that now shadowed her professional, military grade, nothing like the Dodson family's thugs. "Where's Charlotte?" he asked suddenly. Vincent and Claudia exchanged a glance. "She's been unavailable," Claudia said carefully. "Unavailable?" "She's not returning calls. Her apartment's been cleared out." George's jaw tightened. The pregnancy appointments Charlotte kept postponing. The ultrasound images that looked oddly similar. The way she'd grown distant after the divorce was finalized. His phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. A single photograph. Bertha, in a stunning black gown, standing beside Marcus Webb at a private security conference. The caption below, posted by an industry insider: "Hill Global Security officially launches." Backed by Pound 100M in capital and staffed by former intelligence operatives from 5 countries, Bertha Hill isn't playing games. George stared at the screen, a cold dread settling in his chest. What the hell have I done? The first crack appeared during a routine collection meeting. George sat at the head of the table in the Dodson Estates conference room, flanked by his father and 3 senior enforcers. They were discussing territory disputes in East London standard business, except Marcus Riley, one of their most reliable soldiers, wasn't there. "Where's Riley?" George asked. Silence. The kind that precedes bad news. "He handed in his resignation yesterday," Vincent said carefully. "Said he's taking a position with a private security firm." "Which firm?" Another pause. "Hill Global Security." George's hand clenched around his whiskey glass. "Bertha's company." "It's not just Riley," one of the enforcers admitted. 3 others from the docks crew left last week. Same story. Better pay, legitimate operations, and... He hesitated. "They said they'd rather work for someone with integrity." The words hung in the air like an accusation. George stood abruptly. "Get them back. Offer them double." "We tried." They declined. The second crack came from Dublin. Connor Walsh, the Irish connection who'd supplied the Dodsons with weapons for 15 years, sent a terse email. "Regret to inform you, we're pursuing other partnerships. Best of luck." George called him immediately. "Connor, what the hell is this?" "Business, George. Nothing personal. We have contracts, which I'm honoring through the end of the quarter. After that, I'm working with different people. People who don't publicly humiliate pregnant women at funerals." Connor's voice hardened. "That stunt didn't play well, mate. Makes you look cruel, unstable, bad for business." "This is about Bertha?" "This is about reputation. Yours is damaged. Hers is rising. Simple math." He hung up. George stared at his phone, fury and disbelief warring in his chest. By the end of the week, the whispers had become shouts. At the family dinner, his cousin Marcus questioned whether George should still lead the expansion into digital currencies. His uncle suggested Vincent might be better suited to negotiate the upcoming Amsterdam deal. Even Claudia, his own mother, looked at him with something uncomfortably close to disappointment. "You need to fix this," Vincent said after everyone left. "The family is losing confidence." "In me? Or in your brilliant plan to divorce my wife for a mistress who's conveniently disappeared?" Vincent's expression darkened. "Watch your tone. Charlotte hasn't returned a call in 3 weeks," George said, his voice rising. "Her apartment's empty. Her phone's disconnected. Meanwhile, Bertha's on the cover of Forbes, and half our crew is defecting to work for her. So tell me, Father, whose judgment should we be questioning?" George drove to Charlotte's listed address the next morning. The luxury flat in Knightsbridge that he'd leased for her paid for with Dodson money. Empty. Not just vacant. Stripped. Every piece of furniture gone. No forwarding address. The landlord said she'd terminated the lease 2 weeks ago, paid the penalty, and vanished. George stood in the hollow space, his reflection distorted in the bare windows. He called her number again. Disconnected. Her social media deleted. The art gallery where she supposedly worked, they'd never heard of her. Panic coiled in his gut, cold and serpentine. He pulled up the ultrasound photos she'd sent him over the past months. Looked at them closely for the first time. Really looked. The images were nearly identical. Same angle. Same quality. Same. No. He whispered. He zoomed in on the dates. Looked at the metadata. The files had been created on the same day, then edited to show progressive weeks. His hands shook. The pregnancy was fake. Everything was fake. Charlotte Vance, if that was even her real name, had played him. And he'd destroyed his marriage, humiliated his wife, and shattered his reputation for a woman who'd never existed beyond the role she'd been paid to perform. George slumped against the wall, the enormity of his mistake crashing over him. Then his phone rang. His mother. George, we have a problem. Lorenzo Vitali just terminated our shipping agreement. He signed with someone else. Let me guess, George said hollowly. Bertha. How did you guess? The Hill Foundation is now partnered with the Vitali family for Mediterranean operations. Claudia's voice was brittle. What did you do to that woman to make her come after us like this? What did I do? George ended the call and scrolled to Bertha's number. The number he'd deleted from his contacts after the divorce. The number he'd blocked so he wouldn't have to see her pain. He unblocked it. Typed a message. We need to talk. Please. No response. He tried calling. Straight to voicemail. Her voice calm, professional, unfamiliar. You've reached Bertha Hill. Leave a message. Bertha, it's me. His voice cracked. I made a mistake. A terrible mistake. Please call me back. We need to discuss. Just please. Call me. He sent another text. Then another. I know about Charlotte. I know I was wrong. Please. Let me explain. Each message showed as delivered. None were read. She was ignoring him. Deliberately. Completely. That night, Vincent summoned him to the study. The families are talking, Vincent said without preamble. They're saying you're weak, that you let emotions cloud judgment, that the Dodsons are finished as a serious power. This can be fixed. How? Vincent's voice was ice. Your wife is building an empire. Your mistress was a fraud. Our allies are abandoning us. Our soldiers are defecting. The Irish are gone. The Italians are gone. And you're sending desperate text messages like a lovesick teenager. He leaned forward. Fix this, George, or the family will find someone who can. The threat was clear. George returned to his empty penthouse and stared at his phone. At the unanswered messages. At the photos of Bertha circulating online, radiant, powerful, surrounded by people who actually respected her. He'd thought divorcing her at the funeral would break her. Instead, he'd freed her, and now she was destroying him without saying a single word. The invitations arrived on heavy cream cardstock, embossed with gold lettering. The Evelyn Hill Foundation cordially invites you to an evening of legacy, a charity gala benefiting global women's empowerment initiatives. The Dorchester Hotel, London, Saturday, 15th June black tie. At the bottom, in elegant script, in memory of Evelyn Frost Hill visionary, mother, force of nature. 500 invitations, hand-delivered by courier to every major player in Europe's legitimate and illegitimate power structures. Crime families from Naples to Moscow. Politicians from Parliament. Tech billionaires. Hedge fund managers. Old money aristocrats. Diplomats. And delivered personally by Marcus Webb in a gesture of calculated audacity, the Dodson family. George opened his invitation in the study, Vincent and Claudia flanking him. She's inviting us? Claudia's voice mixed disbelief with suspicion. George studied the card, searching for hidden meaning in the gold-embossed letters. It's an olive branch. She's reaching out. Or it's a trap, Vincent muttered. What kind of trap? It's a charity gala. 500 witnesses, politicians, and press. George set the invitation down, something like hope flickering in his chest. She's trying to move forward, show the world we're civilized, that the divorce was mutual. Vincent didn't look convinced. She's been dismantling us for 2 months, George. She doesn't need to mend fences. She's already burned the entire estate. Which is exactly why this makes sense, George insisted. She's won. She knows it. We know it. This is her victory lap, and she's being gracious enough to let us attend. If we refuse, we look weak, afraid. Claudia examined the invitation more closely. The Evelyn Hill Foundation. I've heard about it. They've donated millions. Medical programs, education initiatives, women's shelters. She paused. It's legitimate. Prestigious. Half of London's elite will be there. Then we go, George decided. We show up. We congratulate her. We demonstrate that the Dodsons don't cower. What he didn't say. Maybe if I see her, I can explain. Apologize. Make her understand. The unanswered messages on his phone burned like accusations. Across London, in a Mayfair penthouse Charlotte Vance had rented under her fourth false identity, the invitation arrived via forwarded email. She stared at it on her laptop screen, her stomach churning. An evening of legacy. Charlotte had been paid £225,000 to seduce George Dodson, fake a pregnancy, and facilitate his divorce. Simple work. She'd done similar jobs before wealthy men were easy to manipulate, and their wives even easier to destroy. But the Dodsons had assured her Bertha Hill was nobody. A quiet mafia wife with no resources, no power, no recourse. They'd been catastrophically wrong. Charlotte had been monitoring Bertha's rise with growing alarm. The Forbes article, the security company, the alliances with families far more dangerous than the Dodsons. And now this, a gala that would assemble every major power player in one room. With Bertha Hill at the center, Charlotte's instructions had been clear. Disappear after the divorce, take the money, and never look back. But if Bertha knew the truth about the fake pregnancy, if she had evidence, Charlotte slammed her laptop shut and began searching for flights to South America. At the Hill Foundation's temporary headquarters, a sleek office space in Canary Wharf, Bertha sat with Marcus Webb and Thomas Hartwell, reviewing the final presentation. The audio files are queued, Marcus said, gesturing to his laptop. Video evidence is edited and ready. Documents are organized chronologically. We'll project everything on a screen visible to the entire ballroom. Hartwell added, Legal has confirmed every piece of evidence is admissible and obtained through lawful means. If the Dodsons attempt litigation, they'll lose spectacularly. Bertha nodded, her hand resting on her enormous belly. She was 10 days from her due date. Her doctor had advised against attending the gala. She'd ignored him. The guest list? She asked. Confirmed. 483 acceptances. Everyone who matters will be there. Marcus pulled up a seating chart. The Dodsons will be at table 12, close enough to see clearly, but not close enough to leave easily. Exits will be monitored. And Vitali? Front row. He's particularly eager to watch. Marcus allowed himself a thin smile. He despises the Dodsons, called this opera-level entertainment. Bertha looked at the presentation one more time. Video of George handing her divorce papers at the cemetery. Audio recordings of him planning the betrayal. Bank transfers to Charlotte. The fake ultrasound images. George's voice saying he'd erase the problem. Years of Dodson corruption, violence, and manipulation, all documented, all provable, all about to be revealed to the most powerful people in Europe. This will destroy them, Hartwell said quietly. Professionally, socially, criminally, the Dodson family will be finished. Good, Bertha said simply. Marcus studied her. Are you certain? Once this happens, there's no going back. George will know you orchestrated everything. The families will choose sides. It becomes war. Bertha thought of the cemetery, of signing divorce papers in the dirt, of George's cold voice and Charlotte's smirk, of her mother's warnings and the empire Evelyn had built to protect her. She thought of the baby moving inside her, a daughter the ultrasound had shown. Evelyn Grace, she'd already decided. A new legacy, a new dynasty. I'm certain, Bertha said. A contraction tightened across her belly. She breathed through it, noting the time. The baby was coming soon, maybe sooner than expected. Perfect timing. Then we're ready, Marcus confirmed, closing his laptop. Thomas Hartwell raised his glass of scotch. To Evelyn Hill, who prepared her daughter for war. Bertha raised her water glass, her reflection sharp in the window behind them. To Evelyn, she echoed. And to making sure George Dodson regrets every choice that led him to my mother's grave. Outside, London glittered in the darkness. In 8 days, the city would witness something it had never seen before. A mafia boss's widow delivering justice in diamonds and evidence, and the entire underworld would remember the name Bertha Hill. The Dorchester ballroom had been transformed into something between a palace and a pantheon. Crystal chandeliers cast prismatic light across tables draped in ivory and gold. Centerpieces of white roses and lilies, Evelyn's favorites, perfumed the air. A string quartet played softly as 500 of the world's most powerful people gathered in evening wear that cost more than most people earned in a year. Mafia bosses sat beside cabinet ministers. Billionaires laughed with crime lords. Old money mingled with new power. All of them here for the same reason: to witness Bertha Hill's first major public event as head of the Evelyn Hill Foundation, and to see what the woman scorned at a cemetery had become. Bertha arrived fashionably late. The ballroom fell silent as she entered. The gown was custom Elie Saab, midnight blue silk that flowed like water over her heavily pregnant form, transforming her belly into a crown rather than a burden. Diamonds glittered at her throat and ears, Evelyn's collection, worth £8 million. Her hair was swept into an elegant chignon, her makeup flawless, her expression serene. She looked like royalty. Marcus Webb walked beside her, professional and alert. Behind them, 4 discreet security personnel, former SAS, Marcus had assured her, blended into the crowd. Cameras flashed. Whispers ignited. Lorenzo Vitali stood and began applauding. Within seconds, the entire ballroom followed. 500 people rose to their feet as Bertha Hill walked through their midst like a queen returning from exile. She smiled graciously, nodded to familiar faces, and took her seat at the head table. George watched from table 12, his face pale, his tuxedo suddenly feeling too tight. Beside him sat Charlotte Vance. She'd arrived 30 minutes earlier, panic barely concealed beneath designer cosmetics and an emerald Versace dress. The prosthetic belly she wore looked convincing enough, but her hands trembled as she clutched a champagne flute. "I told you we shouldn't have come," she hissed. "And look weak? Afraid?" George's jaw was tight. "She invited us. We're here. It's fine." But it didn't feel fine. Across the room, Vincent and Claudia Dodson sat rigid, their smiles plasticky, their eyes tracking Bertha's every movement like prey animals watching a predator. Dinner was served. Speeches were made. A children's choir performed. Donations were pledged, millions of pounds for women's shelters, education programs, medical initiatives. Then Thomas Hartwell took the stage. "Ladies and gentlemen, it is my profound honor to introduce the woman who has made tonight possible. A woman of extraordinary strength, vision, and grace. A woman carrying forward her mother's remarkable legacy. Please welcome the founder and chair of the Evelyn Hill Foundation, Miss Bertha Hill." The applause was thunderous. Bertha rose slowly, one hand on her belly, and walked to the stage. The lights dimmed. A massive screen descended behind her. "Thank you all for being here tonight," she began, her voice clear and steady. "My mother, Evelyn Hill, believed in justice, in truth, in protecting those who cannot protect themselves." Heads nodded, glasses raised in tribute. "She also believed," Bertha continued, "in exposing those who abuse power, who manipulate the vulnerable, who mistake cruelty for strength." The room's energy shifted, became alert, predatory. George's stomach dropped. "3 months ago, I lost my mother. At her burial, my husband," she gestured toward George, and every eye in the ballroom swiveled to him, "chose that moment to hand me divorce papers, while the priest prayed, while I grieved, while I carried his child." The screen lit up. Video footage played, crystal clear. George at the cemetery, thrusting papers at Bertha, her face shattered with grief. Charlotte standing behind him, hand on her belly, smirking. Gasps rippled through the crowd. "I thought I'd lost everything," Bertha said, "but my mother prepared me. She left me not just her fortune." The screen changed, showing documents, account statements, £700 million in assets, but something far more valuable. New images appeared, text messages between George and Charlotte. "Once her mother's dead, we move. The timing has to be perfect. Charlotte, I can't wait to see her face." The ballroom erupted in murmurs. "She left me the truth," Bertha said. Bank transfer records appeared. Vincent and Claudia Dodson's accounts. Payments to Charlotte Vance. £50,000. £75,000. £100,000. George's parents paid this woman £225,000 to seduce him, to fake a pregnancy, to ensure I was removed from the family before my inheritance was revealed. Charlotte stood abruptly, her chair scraping. "I'm not." "Sit down, Miss Vance." Marcus Webb's voice cut through the room like a blade. 2 security personnel materialized beside her. She sat. The screen changed again. Medical records, side by side, ultrasound images. Every ultrasound she sent my husband was digitally altered. Stock photography edited to show progressive weeks. Charlotte Vance has never been pregnant. The belly she's wearing tonight is prosthetic. Laughter erupted. Cruel, mocking laughter from men who'd built empires on deception and now watched someone else's con collapse spectacularly. George lunged toward Charlotte. You told me you said. I was paid, Charlotte screamed. Your parents paid me. They wanted her gone. Audio began playing. Vincent Dodson's voice filled the ballroom. And if she fights the divorce? George's voice. Then we erase the problem. Accidents happen. Pregnant women are fragile. Silence fell like a guillotine. Then chaos. Vitaly stood, laughing openly. George Dodson, you fool. You absolute fool. Other crime bosses joined in, mocking, jeering. Several ripped up business cards, throwing them toward table 12 like confetti. A Russian oligarch shouted, The Dodsons are finished. Who wants to partner with idiots? Politicians scrambled toward exits, distancing themselves from the scandal. Journalists' phones appeared, recording everything. Vincent tried to stand. This is slander fabricated. Every document is authenticated, Thomas Hartwell announced from beside the stage. Every recording legally obtained. Sue if you like. We welcome it. George sat frozen, his empire collapsing in real time, his father's face purple with rage, his mother weeping, Charlotte being escorted out by security, her prosthetic belly visible beneath her dress as she struggled. And through it all, Bertha stood center stage, calm and radiant, one hand on her real belly, the other holding the microphone. My mother taught me that power isn't about violence or intimidation, she said softly. It's about preparation, truth, and knowing when to strike. She looked directly at George. You tried to bury me at her graveside. But like Evelyn, I rose. The applause began slowly, then built into something seismic. 500 people, criminals and politicians and billionaires, rose to their feet again, not for politeness this time, but for genuine respect. Bertha Hill had just destroyed the Dodson family without raising her voice. She stepped off the stage as a contraction seized her stronger this time. Unmistakable. Marcus appeared at her side. Hospital? Hospital, she confirmed, as security cleared a path through the chaos, past George's devastated face and the Dodsons' ruin. Bertha allowed herself one small, satisfied smile. Her daughter was ready to be born, and she was entering a world where her mother was untouchable. The tabloids called it the Gala Massacre. Within 24 hours, footage from the Evelyn Hill Foundation event had circulated through every crime family, corporate boardroom, and political office in Europe. The video of George's humiliation played on loop across social media. Memes appeared. Commentary pieces in The Guardian and Financial Times dissected the Dodsons' fall from grace. George Dodson became a cautionary tale overnight. He found Charlotte at a budget hotel near Heathrow. Her bags already packed. Her flight to Sao Paulo leaving in 4 hours. She didn't run when he kicked open the door. Just stood there, makeup smeared, the prosthetic belly discarded on the bed like shed skin. You destroyed me, George said, his voice hollow. Charlotte laughed bitter, exhausted. I destroyed you? Your parents destroyed you, George. I was just the hired help. She zipped her suitcase. They approached me, offered me more money than I'd make in 5 years. All I had to do was seduce you, play pregnant, and help remove the wife they wanted gone. Why? Because Evelyn Hill was dying, and they knew Bertha would inherit something. They wanted you free to remarry someone they could control, someone without a fortune. She shouldered her bag. They just didn't expect the fortune to be 700 million pounds. George slumped against the doorframe. You could have told me. When you realized... Told you what? That I was a fraud? That your parents paid me to ruin your marriage? Charlotte moved past him. You made your choices, George. You handed your pregnant wife divorce papers at her mother's grave. That wasn't me. That was you. She walked out. George stood alone in the empty hotel room, surrounded by discarded lies, and finally understood. He'd lost everything, chasing something that never existed. Evelyn Grace Hill was born at 3:47 a.m. on June 16th. 7 pounds, 4 ounces. Perfect lungs that announced her arrival with a cry that sounded, to Bertha's exhausted ears, almost triumphant. Marcus Webb waited outside the private suite at Portland Hospital, coordinating security. Thomas Hartwell arrived at dawn with flowers and legal documents establishing Evelyn Grace's trust fund, 50 million pounds, untouchable, guaranteed. She'll never be vulnerable, Hartwell said softly, looking through the window at the sleeping infant. Not like you were. Bertha, exhausted but radiant, held her daughter against her chest. No, she won't. The baby's tiny hand curled around Bertha's finger, and something fierce and protective settled into Bertha's bones. This child would grow up knowing her grandmother's strength, would inherit an empire built on intelligence, not violence, would never kneel in dirt while cruel men discarded her. She's beautiful, Marcus observed. She's a hill, Bertha replied. She'll be unstoppable. The Dodson empire crumbled over the following weeks. Vincent and Claudia were investigated for fraud, conspiracy, and attempted murder based on the audio recordings. Their assets were frozen. Half their soldiers defected to rival families or Hill Global Security. George became a ghost, avoided at gatherings, mocked in private conversations, stripped of the respect that once made him dangerous. He tried calling Bertha twice more. Both times, Marcus answered and delivered the same message. Miss Hill has nothing to say to you. Do not call again. The Dodson name, once feared, became synonymous with stupidity and failure. Meanwhile, Bertha's empire expanded. She partnered with Vitali on Mediterranean shipping routes, established security contracts across Eastern Europe, invested in tech startups that would reshape digital finance. The Hill Foundation donated millions, while Hill Global Investments generated billions. Journalists called her the Phoenix of London. Crime families called her untouchable. Politicians called her for advice. At 6 weeks postpartum, Bertha attended her first board meeting with Evelyn Grace sleeping in a designer carrier against her chest. The optics were perfect power and motherhood, strength and grace, legacy and future combined. No one questioned her authority again. George thought divorcing me here would bury me beside you. Thought grief and shame would break me permanently. A small, fierce smile crossed her face. But you taught me something he never understood. This is the moment everything changes. Bertha is about to step into a power George never saw coming. If you're rooting for her, if you believe people who underestimate women deserve what's coming, leave a comment below. Tell me, what would you do with $700 million and evidence of betrayal? Let's talk about it. Now let's watch Bertha rise. 3 months after the gala, Bertha returned to the cemetery. The morning was gray and quiet, much like the day they'd buried Evelyn. But this time, Bertha wore Chanel in confidence. Marcus waited by the car, respectful of the privacy she needed. She stood before her mother's headstone, polished black granite with gold lettering. Evelyn Frosthill Visionary, Mother, Force of Nature. Thur, 1958 to 2025. Bertha held Evelyn Grace in her arms, the baby wrapped in cashmere against the cool air. I brought her to meet you, Mum, Bertha said softly. Your granddaughter. Your legacy. The baby stirred but didn't wake. You were right about everything. The Dodsons, George, the betrayal. Bertha's voice strengthened. You prepared me for war, and I won. The empire you built, I've doubled it. The evidence you gathered, I used it to destroy them completely. She looked at the grave where, months ago, she'd knelt broken and abandoned. George thought divorcing me here would bury me beside you. Thought grief and shame would break me permanently. A small, fierce smile crossed her face. But you taught me something he never understood. The wind rustled through the cemetery trees. You taught me that real power isn't loud or violent. It's patient, strategic, inevitable. She shifted Evelyn Grace higher, the baby's small hand resting against her heart. You taught me to rise. Bertha knelt not in defeat this time, but in tribute, and placed a bouquet of white lilies on the grave. I promise you, Mum, I'll build a dynasty that honors your name. I'll protect Evelyn Grace the way you protected me, and I'll make sure everyone remembers what happens when someone underestimates a Hill woman. She stood, powerful and unbroken, her daughter in her arms and an empire at her back. Behind her, Marcus approached quietly. Miss Hill, the car is ready. You have the Vitali meeting at 2, and the Minister of Finance at 4. Bertha nodded, taking one last look at her mother's grave. They tried to bury me here beside you, she whispered. But like Evelyn Hill taught me, phoenixes don't stay in ashes. She turned and walked toward the car, toward her empire, toward the future she'd claimed from the wreckage of betrayal. The cemetery fell silent behind her. But London and the entire underworld would remember Bertha Hill's name for generations. George thought he could bury Bertha at her mother's grave. Instead, she buried his entire legacy. If this story gave you chills, if you're satisfied by the justice she delivered, let me know in the comments. What was your favorite moment? And if you loved this, subscribe because stories like Bertha's deserve to be told. And I've got plenty more where this came from.